The AI revolution is here, and it feels, well, chaotic, right? Unpredictable, maybe a little overwhelming. But what if I told you there's a hidden pattern? A roadmap, really. A cycle that's already played out twice before, and it tells us pretty much exactly what's going to happen next with AI. Stick with me, and you'll see the future with a whole new kind of clarity.
All right, so here's the game plan. We're going to start by uncovering this hidden secret from history. Then, we'll dive into a really powerful framework called the three-phase supercycle. We'll put it to the test with two massive revolutions, oil and computers. And then, we'll use that exact same lens to figure out who the real winners of today's AI gold rush are going to be. This is the billion-dollar question, isn't it? We're all seeing these mind-blowing valuations for the companies building the core AI tech. But is that where the real, long-lasting money is going to be made? History actually has a pretty shocking answer for us, and it's a hard no.
Okay, so the key to unlocking this whole puzzle is a concept called the supercycle. You can think of it like a recurring three-act play that pops up every time there's a massive technological shift. It shows exactly how value gets created and, more importantly, who captures it. And honestly, once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it.
So every major tech revolution unfolds in these three distinct phases. First, you have the extractive phase, where a brand new resource is basically mined and made available. Then comes the distribution phase, where people figure out all the cool stuff to do with that resource. And finally, you get the destruction phase, where the market gets so crowded that the value has to find somewhere else to go. Let's dig into what each of these really means. The extractive phase is all about the heavy lifting. It's about building the pipes, right? A powerful new resource, think of it like oil from the ground or raw computing power, is suddenly made widely available and, crucially, incredibly cheap. Now, this takes a ton of investment, and it's usually dominated by just a handful of huge players who are building out that fundamental infrastructure. To really see this thing in action, let's jump in our time machine. We're going back to the beginning of the 20th century to the rise of oil. It's our first and maybe our most perfect example of a supercycle. So the story kicks off in 1901. The Spindletop oil well erupts in Texas, and that starts the extractive phase. Then, companies like Ford and GM come along and figure out what to do with all that cheap black gold. That's the distributive phase kicking into high gear. But by the 1960s, the market was just flooded with cheap oil. So flooded that OPEC had to be created just to artificially control the supply and keep prices from totally collapsing. The explosive growth was over. That right there is the destructive phase. I mean, just look at this number. It tells you everything you need to know about the extractive phase. One company, John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil, completely owned the game. They built the refineries, they laid the pipelines, and by 1904, they controlled a mind-boggling 91% of all U.S. oil. He became a titan by making oil cheap and abundant. He was the ultimate extractor. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Rockefeller absolutely won phase one, no question. But the biggest fortunes, they were made in the next phase. The real money wasn't in the oil itself, it was in what you could do with it. Ford sold 15 million Model Ts. They created the killer app for gasoline. They didn't drill for oil, they put it to work for the average person. And this perfectly shows you who wins the distributive phase. It's not about the raw tech anymore. Ford was all about engineering efficiency. You can have any color as long as it's black. But it was GM that really mastered distribution. With planned obsolescence, they turned the car into a fashion statement. They used marketing to convince people they needed a new one every year. GM won with sales and style, not just a better engine. Okay, so that's oil. But you might be thinking, was that just a fluke? Well, let's test the pattern against the next great revolution, the rise of the personal computer. And, spoiler alert, you're going to see the exact same three-act play. It's the same story, just with different actors. For 30 years, companies like Intel poured billions into R&D to make computer chips, CPUs, cheap and powerful. That's your extractive phase. Then, in the 90s, the Pentium chip and Windows launch, and the PC boom begins. Hello, distributive phase, where software was king. Fast forward to the 2010s, and, you guessed it, the software market was completely saturated. The destructive phase had arrived. Just look at this growth during the extractive phase. It was absolutely explosive. The market for these chips was growing by 30% a year. Companies like Intel were the new Standard Oil, and they were making the core resource, computing power, abundant and cheap for everyone. But here is the absolute key takeaway, the one thing you have to remember from all this. Intel was a giant, yes, but the real value, 10 times more value, was captured by the software companies, Microsoft, Google, you name it. They didn't make the chips. They built entire empires on top of them, distributing the power of cheap computing to the entire world.
And inevitably, just like with oil, that golden age ended. The distributive phase bled into the destructive phase. The software market became what's been called a Malthusian bloodbath. What a term, right? It just means a brutal, bloody fight for survival where hundreds of companies were all doing the same thing, competing on tiny features and price. When that happens, there are no massive profits left. The value had moved on again.
So, this brings us right back to today. With these lessons from oil and CPUs, we now have this incredibly powerful lens to understand the AI revolution. We are literally living through another supercycle, right here, right now.
There is no doubt about it. We are deep in the heart of AI's extractive phase. Companies like NVIDIA, they're the new Intel, building the chips. And companies like OpenAI and Anthropic, they're the new Standard Oil, refining raw data into usable intelligence. They are pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into making AI tokens the new cheap, abundant resource for all of us. I mean, look at NVIDIA's growth. From 2 to 3 trillion in market cap in just 96 days. That is pure extractive phase energy. But, and this is a big but, if you look closely, the signs of a shift are already here. The value is starting to move. Microsoft is already making billions from AI applications. Founders are leaving the big research labs to build those applications. And some AI tools, like image generation, are already becoming commodities. So make no mistake, the transition to the distributive phase isn't some far-off prediction. It's happening as we speak.
So we come right back to our original question. If the extractive phase is being won by the builders of chips and models, who is going to capture the lion's share of the value over the next decade? Well, the pattern gives us a crystal clear answer.
Just look at this table. It lays the whole pattern out, clear as day. In every cycle, the big money eventually flows away from the people who make the raw resource and toward the people who package it up and sell it to the masses. Oil. Standard Oil gives way to Ford and GM. CPUs. Intel gives way to Microsoft and Google. AI, NVIDIA and OpenAI, they're going to give way to the distributors.
So here it is. The real winners of the AI revolution will not be the companies making the underlying intelligence. It will be the AI apps, the specialized co-pilots for every profession, the AI-powered doctors, the companies that brand, package, and distribute AI to solve specific real-world problems. Just like GM won with better marketing, the winners here will be masters of distribution, not just research.
The history of technology is really just a history of these super cycles, playing out one after another. And eventually, even this AI boom will enter its destructive phase, and the value will move on to the next great innovation. The pattern is going to repeat. So the real question to leave you with is what you think that next new abundant resource will be.